All right, shall we get started? I think we can get started. And to everybody who signed up and wasn't able to make it because of a meeting, you should be getting the review. And if you've got any questions from this video, you can always DM any of us who are on this panel. But thank you for coming. I'm excited to host this panel. This panel is obviously with three incredibly talented and smart people. And so we'll kick it off right here. Just before we get started, though, some housekeeping rules. This session will be recorded. So make sure that you don't jump off mute. All attendees will stay muted, so don't mess with that. The chat section can be hidden. If it's bothering you, if too many things are popping up, just hit X. That's also where we want all of your questions to go. So as you have questions that pop up, drop them in the chat. There's a digital team here who've done an amazing job prepping us and getting this event going. They will take the questions, put them on the side, and then right at the end of the panel, we will get to the questions. So as soon as you have them, drop them in there so you don't forget, and then we'll make sure we get to them. Now, starting off, these are your speakers for today. We've got myself here, of course. Next up, we've got Ari. Ari's the Chief Growth Officer at Sharma Brands. She oversees and executes all the growth for our clients, from acquisition to their commerce experience, their website, their acquisition retention, and all the other tactics that help them expand, including international shipping. If you don't know me, my name is Nik. I started Sharma Brands, which is a growth firm focused on scaling brands doing 30 to 300 million in revenue. We also focus on brand launches, companies like Jolie or Feastables, POV Beauty, which was just announced yesterday, and others. Next on this panel, we've got Alex Yancher. Alex is a legend. He is the CEO and co-founder of Passport Global. Prior to Passport, Alex was the COO of Pantry. And he also worked at Meta, Morgan Stanley, and others. And last but not least, we've got another legend, Alex Stark. For the last 11-ish years, he's been building Ogee Skincare as their co-founder and CMO to an incredible omni-channel business. So I'm very excited to get started with today's panel. If you have any questions, again, leave them in the chat. We'll make sure we put them on the side. If you have any questions that we don't get to and you want to follow up, you can email any of us. I think we're pretty much all first name at domainofourcompany.com. Or you can message us on Twitter, or X, I should say now. But without further ado, if there's nothing else from the Alexes or from Ari, let's get into today's program. So to start in setting the stage, I want to ask, expanding internationally is a major opportunity for e-commerce brands, but it does come with its own set of challenges, whether we know them beforehand or not. So I'm curious what you guys think. Why should brands be thinking about global growth now? And if they don't do that, then what is at stake for them?
I think for me, if you're not thinking ahead to where you can diversify, then there's always a risk. And of course, you can predict what will happen in the US and you can base your goals on it. But I'd rather have all of my eggs in multiple baskets. And I feel like it's better to do that when times are good. So even if you're growing in the US, which of course we all are, you want to get ahead of it. And I think now it's just so much better to not be US centric.
Yeah, I'll speak to that as well. I think to the point of risk diversification, that's a big part for us is not having all our eggs in one basket as well. And I think, the logistical side of it is challenging, which Passport thankfully is handling, so we don't have to. But a lot of the other parts, like the advertising, the website, a lot of the things you can do internationally without doing that much different than you're probably doing now in the US, at least to certain countries where you're not having to change languages. So I think a lot of us who are doing D2C in the US have built up the muscle that we need to succeed internationally. So it's kind of missing out on a huge opportunity by not leaning in internationally.
I'll go next. So I guess I get asked a lot, when should brands start thinking about international? And this is kind of the spirit of the question here too. I always say, first of all, go on your Google Analytics and see what percentage of your traffic is already international. Even if you don't accept orders internationally, I bet you it's going to be surprisingly high. I've seen brands surprised that they're getting double digits, so like 12% of their traffic. Canada, especially for American brands, it's in the splash zone of your marketing efforts. Whether you, especially if you have a strategy of going with influencers. You look at Kim Kardashian, and 90% of her fan base is actually outside of the US. So most brands, day one, are already to a certain extent international. The question is, what are you going to do to unlock that potential and capture that revenue? I kind of break it down into a crawl, walk, run approach. The crawl is, you want to be able to just the lowest common denominator, be able to ship internationally. The right way to ship internationally is to collect duties and taxes up front so that your customer down the road doesn't get hit with a surprise duty bill, a note on the door saying you have to come into the post office. That method of shipping is called DDU, deliver duties unpaid. So I would even say, I wouldn't even say doing DDU is crawl anymore. That's really just like not an acceptable customer experience. So the crawl is, at the very least, charge your customers duties and taxes, be able to pay that up front. That's crawl. Walk is it's a little bit more involved, but not that much more. Basically, you're internationalizing your site. So, local currencies, we're going to kind of get into exactly what that means. So I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but there's somebody in New Zealand here. You kind of know what it looks like to go on a website that does not keep you in mind. The pricing is in a currency that you're not really familiar with. You kind of have to have a calculator and go back and forth. The taxes are confusing to you. Are they included? Are they not included? So it's just not a localized experience. And then the run is where you've really nailed international, or you feel like you're at a point in your brand's trajectory where international could be a very, very big part of your business, and you're kind of, let's say, in the 8-figure range. You can do what we call in-country fulfillment. So have goods locally in Canada, UK, Australia, so forth, and fulfill orders locally. That's definitely advanced and adds a level of complexity. Again, we're going to get into some of these details later in this presentation, but that's the run part of going global, is being so localized that your products are physically in the country, ready to be picked and packed and shipped, and you're basically able to match any competitor in that country in terms of the operating cost basis and the transit times. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Stark, you touched on some of the site changes and optimizing the site, and Yancher, in your crawl, walk, run approach, you also mentioned that. So that kind of moves us to the next question I had, which is that I'm curious, Ari and Alex Stark, what did you guys learn firsthand or from peers when selling internationally, or before you went to go sell internationally? And what were the unexpected challenges that you came across that you didn't foresee, prior to making that decision?
Yeah, so I think from our side, when we first started to lean into it, before we started working with Passport, it's a nightmare logistically to go to ship to a lot of countries, to make sure that the duty is paid, to Alex Yanker's point of if making sure that the customer receives it. The worst thing that they can do is receive a package and then they have to go pick it up at the post office and pay a bunch of duty on it. You're definitely not going to get that customer back, and you'll probably have a lot of returns or packages that don't get delivered. So we saw logistically, it was very hard to do on our own. Plus, being registered for taxes and tax compliance in these various countries, it's hard enough doing that in all the states in the US. But to figure that out in all these countries is just overwhelming. So we learned quickly we needed a good partner to do that with internationally, to help us with those logistical issues. And then, it was sort of that crawl, walk, run approach. Once we started getting into it with Passport, we quickly saw that, we were getting a lot of site traffic, to Alex's point earlier, that if you look at your site traffic, you're probably getting a lot of people internationally already. And if you're not selling, you're kind of just missing those opportunities. Or if you look at your organic social media, if you see where the visitors are coming from, or if you have a lot of influencers and creators you work with, their audiences are international. So there's a ton of people that want to buy from you internationally, even if you're not advertising there, most likely. And so then once we started getting set up logistically, we saw, that like, I think just getting started is the key thing. That's always like the key thing. Like, don't be overwhelmed. Like, find a partner that can help you get started in something and then perfect it over time. Do like whatever they say, the 20% that gets 80% of the results. And that's kind of what we got going. And then work to optimize the experience for our customers and really streamline the process for people, and each element that we're able to do, with Passport Global really advising us on what they'd seen work for others, just improved the conversion rate significantly for international customers and allowed us to then really scale with advertising.
And to that too, I think if Passport can handle the logistics and has a bigger eagle eye into how this all should go, then your team can avoid, at least for us, our teams can avoid focusing all of our energy on sort of the details of those pieces and instead try to act like a local customer. And I think the biggest mistake is when you try to just rip whatever you're doing in the US and put it up in a new country. And I think it's a big waste of money. I also think that when you spend all of your time focusing on what it's like to be a customer in the place that you're operating, you don't make as many mistakes. Like when we first started selling into Canada in a big way for one of our brands with Passport, we were over-indexing and thinking about what some of their holidays would be. And like Family Day, for example, we forecasted in our plans and in our growth budgets where we were going to spend up like 200%. But nobody actually buys anything on Family Day is what we learned. And we didn't know that because we didn't spend any time talking to Canadian customers. We didn't try to figure out what actually it's like to be within this country. And that's a country that we should really understand, right? It's right next door. And I think then you start to think about all the places that you do ship once this all starts to go well, which it will if you focus on the right things. And I think the marketing team should spend our time on localizing our marketing, and then we can have the right partners to make sure that we're operationalizing. But like big missed forecasts when you spend your time in the wrong places, and the same creatives never work the way you'd expect. And even not just like, of course, you're going to localize spelling. Of course, you're going to localize, to the right holidays. But we didn't understand, like, we had the wrong conversion of a shipping metric of like, not shipping metric, a like measurement metric of how many quarts this thing is, but they don't even use quarts. And you just start to not focus on the right things if you aren't thinking like a customer there. So that's the biggest opportunity to me.
Yeah, I agree. I was always surprised with, how much of a difference it makes spelling color with a U when you're international, or changing add to cart to add to bag, or, even like you said, some of the measurement stuff. And Yancher, I'm curious from a logistics and operations standpoint, what does it mean to successfully localize your business for international customers?
Yeah, great question. Let me break it down in two categories because the answer is different depending on what we're talking about. If we're talking about direct to consumer, shipping cross-border from, let's say, US or Canada to rest of the world, including Canada from US, it's a different set of rules and requirements. Just from a bird's eye view, the way the local customs views it with direct to consumer is as if a Canadian went on vacation, went to California, bought something, hand cream, and took it back to Canada. There's nothing wrong with that. They're not going to stop you. They're not going to police you and say, hey, this doesn't have the right, this isn't in French, you can't bring it back to Canada. They're not going to say that. However, with B2B, if you want to sell something on the shelves in Walmart or Amazon or a boutique or something like that, and moreover, if you wanted to sell something and fulfill it locally, like the in-country fulfillment, the run that I was referring to earlier, it's a different set of standards. That Canada, for example, although it's pretty much every country in the world has this approach, they feel like it's their right and the responsibility for consumer protection reasons to ensure that any chemical that's not allowed in that country is identified and the product isn't allowed, that all the even if everything is allowed, still the labeling requirements are up to the standards of that country. Every country has their own FDA. So Canada has Health Canada. It's very similar, and they have to give you authorization to sell. Again, for B2B. And this is the thing that a lot of brands get confused about, especially in the cosmetics or supplement industry. They think, I'm not even going to bother with international. Oh, I have to translate everything into French. I have to get new labels. I have to do product testing. Well, all of that is technically true for B2B. It is not true for D2C. The requirements are, the only real requirement is if something is like truly illegal in the country, you can't ship it. So if there is some chemical or something that's not allowed in Canada, they won't even let you ship that D2C. But if it's not explicitly not allowed, or it is allowed, but you need to have some kind of disclosure on a label, that's not part of their rules and regulations. So I think probably for the most part, people on this call are going to be more interested in D2C, although everybody has a little bit of a B2B business to a certain extent with the rise of companies like Fair and the multi-channel approach. So that's why I usually just focus on explaining what's required for D2C. So for D2C, you still need a compliance check because, again, like I said, you need to make sure that there's no ingredient or chemical or whatever that is just really strictly prohibited in that country, or it's a type of product that, again, just for whatever reason isn't allowed in that country in the first place. Obviously things like weapons and what have you. But even in the cosmetics field, there's still a lot of things that sometimes just aren't allowed. So that needs to be checked out. And then you need to make sure that you're in compliance with local fiscal requirements. So what does that look like in the US? Well, in the US, we have state taxes, we have corporate taxes if you have nexus in the country, and every country has some version of a consumption tax, so some version of a sales tax. In UK and EU, it's called VAT, value-added tax. It acts in a very similar way. The number's really high. So if we think our state taxes are high in the US. I'm in California. It doesn't get any higher than this. I think we're like at 8.5. In UK, it's 20%. So it's more than double. In Australia, it's 10%, and that's considered low. So every country has a tax. They all call it something different. In Canada, it's called GST. And then some countries have both a government federal level tax, like in Canada, they have a GST, but there's also provincial state tax. So you also need to worry about provincial state taxes. And that's one complication and hurdle that brands need to just be aware of, and they need to find a solution provider that can help them, stay in compliance and collect the correct amount in cart. But some countries like UK, EU, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, Switzerland, Singapore. I think I named most of them. There might be one or two that I forgot. They actually require the merchant to register with the local authority and be the responsible party for paying and collecting that VAT, the GST, and so forth. Versus the way it works in Canada, where you don't need to do any registrations. You can ship something to Canada, and your customs broker, your international shipping provider, so in our case, Passport Shipping, would be the responsible party for paying the customs broker for the GST, the PSC, the consumption taxes in Canada. But that's not how it works for UK. For UK, even if you ship something that costs $1 once a year, technically, the letter of the law says that you have to register with HMRC. That's their version of IRS. You have to register with HMRC, get a VAT number, and collect VAT and pay. This is we have a solution for it, a Passport. It's called Seller of Record that basically stands in the place of the merchant. But that's just something to keep in mind for any brand that's looking to sell in some of these markets, just to know what the regulatory and what the fiscal compliance requirements are.
Yeah, it's crazy how many things are required. One more thing, kind of doubling down there, I want to touch on is tariffs. So, Alex, you kind of alluded a little bit to this in terms of how it's getting trickier, but the whole concept of tariffs and regulations, especially with Trump's latest policies, have made international expansion much trickier. And I think there's also not really a central place to see updates or learn about this or really understand at a high level, fifth grade language, what's going on. So what should brands be aware of, and how can they stay compliant while staying profitable?
Yeah. It's a crazy time. Tons of turbulence, and a lot of uncertainty. So there's been a new tax that has been introduced, and it's called a surtax, which is kind of like a tariff. This is the famous 25% on Canada and Canada reciprocal. This is a surtax, which has certain elements that make it a little bit different than a tariff. So let me back up. There's always been tariffs. That's nothing new. U.S. Has tariffs on China, and China has tariffs on U.S. For the most part, most relevant products in the e-commerce industry for purposes of considering tariffs between Canada and Mexico would fall under the U.S. Mexico Canada free trade agreement. Free trade means zero tariff. So there haven't been that many tariffs between Canada and U.S. and vice versa, and Mexico as well. But China, we've always had tariffs on China, and they range somewhere between 10% to 39% for apparel. Okay, those tariffs, they're rough, and some people got around it by shipping direct to consumer from China, or Chinese goods, but shipped from Mexico into U.S. Or from Canada into U.S. so that they could fall under the $800 de minimis. I'm assuming most people on this call are familiar with this de minimis and what it means, and what's at play here with that. But in short, anything under this magic number, $800, for whatever reason, you get to go in duty free. So you'd avoid, that 39% tariff. It was a huge business. A ton of huge retailers, especially in the apparel fashion space, would domicile inventory in Mexico or Canada so they can ship direct to consumer under that $800 de minimis and avoid paying tariffs. Okay. Then the surtax is hit. Okay. It's a form of tariff, 25% or 10% at first on China, then 20%. And the problem with these is you can't even get a duty drawback on it. So you used to be able to, this whole webinar is around international. So, all right, yeah, you have to pay that tariff for anything that you sell in the U.S. However, we're talking about international here. There's a beautiful thing where if you ship something from U.S. to Canada or to Australia or to EU, you can actually get a refund on the Chinese, on the tariffs that you paid on the goods made in China. You got to get a refund on those for anything that you would export from US abroad to Canada, EU, so forth. Amazing. So you wouldn't, at least for international, you wouldn't have to worry about those tariffs. But this surtax, and this is why I'm calling out that this is a little bit different. Unfortunately, the surtax you cannot get a duty drawback for. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Okay. Second thing. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And for the 25% tariffs that we even threatened, we actually haven't even put on this 25% tariff onto Canadian goods under the that are governed by the U.S. Mexico Canada Free Trade Agreement. It was threatened. It looked like it was going to happen, and then Trump pulled back and said that anything that falls under the USMCA will not be hit with that 25% tariff. But Canada hit us with a 25% tariff. And it's also surtax. And I'll tell you why that matters. Canada has a de minimis of their own. It's 150 Canadian dollars. So anything that you ship from US to Canada, if it's under 150 Canadian dollars, which is about 100 US, it would get to go in duty free. So even if there was some tariff, okay, it's going to be duty free under 150. That's where a lot of e-commerce is anyways. However, unfortunately, this 25% surtax does not fall under that de minimis setup. So actually, let me do a quick PSA for anybody who's listening. If anybody has a good that's made in the US, by the way, this is specifically for made in US goods. you should check your cart. And if you sell into Canada, if it's made in the US, you should check your cart and you should make sure that you're charging your customers an incremental 25%. And if you're not, that's fine too, but just know that your service provider, your carrier, your internationalization service provider is going to be charging you that 25% because they're going to be charged. We're already seeing our invoices come for packages that we clear for US country of origin into Canada. We're already seeing that 25% tax. So they're going to be charging you. You should be aware that this is going to be a hit on your margin. I advise at least temporarily to put in an extra line in your, Shopify store or what have you that charges that extra 25%. Knock on wood, this is a temporary thing, and we're going to be back to normal under the USMCA, zero tariffs on US made goods, at least on US made goods, at least under the de minimis. Hopefully that goes away in a few months, but really it's anybody's guess. So that I think is probably a relevant question. Let me see. There's a question here. Let me take some of these live. If anybody has any follow-ups or if I said anything confusing, I'm happy to clarify. Let me read this here. Lost it. That's only for made in US, not shipping Chinese goods to Canada. That is correct. That's an important distinction. This is Canada reciprocating against US. What do we care about? We care about goods made in US. Of course, if you're an e-commerce seller, some of your goods might be made in China. That's not impacted here. They're not trying to punish, at least in this round, they're not trying to punish China. They're trying to punish US manufacturing and make US manufacturing more expensive to sell into Canada. So the spirit of it is we're gonna put in that 25% surtax, tariff, whatever you want to call it, on a US made good, not something that's shipped from the US. So if it's made in Philippines or China or Vietnam, that's 25% does not apply, just to clarify that. Vice versa as well. When we're threatening our 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, we're talking about Canadian made goods. So even if it's a Canadian made good, but it's shipped from China, it's still going to get hit with the 25%. Or if China's a bad example, if it gets shipped from Argentina and it's made in Canada, it will be hit with that 25%. And same with a US made good. If a US made good is shipped into Canada from China for whatever reason, it would be charged at 25%. The other interesting thing that I wanted to share with the group is around the de minimis. I mentioned it earlier on that one way to avoid all of these incremental tariffs that we're putting onto countries left and right, especially onto China. That's the only one that seems to have stuck, at least so far, with the exception of like aluminum, steel, and a few other categories related to Canada and Mexico. But really across the board, everything made in China is being hit with this 20% extra surtax. The way to avoid that is to ship direct to consumer into the US cross-border under this $800 de minimis. What the most recent executive order said, this is just from a week ago, about the de minimis is it will be removed. So for a hot minute, it was removed in early February for like a few days, and then it was reinstated. What the administration is saying is that the de minimis is going to be removed when the CBP is ready with all of its systems being in place to handle it. Nobody knows exactly what that means. I've done some light digging and going on LinkedIn and seeing if CBP is hiring, I don't know, tens of thousands of people. They're not. So I'm not sure what they're really doing to get ready for this. But supposedly, it is going to go away in the not too distant future. But it's really anybody's guess at this point when it goes away. So I'll leave it at that. Nik, if you want to ask any follow-up questions or move on to the next topic.
Yeah, only follow-up question I have for you is you mentioned an example of American-made goods being shipped in from China. Does that mean it's an American company, or does that mean you're saying like it would be produced in America, shipped to China where a 3PL is, and then shipped to another country?
Yeah, I think that's probably not a very common scenario. I'm just more using that to illustrate the point that
Cool.
These tariffs, these surtaxes are applied to made in, not shipped from. So made in US, shipped from wherever. that's what's going to trigger that incremental duty.
Awesome. And Stark and Ari, I'm curious, how have you guys approached customs and compliance when managing different businesses? Any lessons learned there?
Well, yeah, from our side, just listening to Alex talk about this, it hurts my brain to think about all these different regulations. We're just talking about like Canada right now, mainly, and China. But each country is very complex, and things can change really quickly, obviously, as we're seeing. And we really don't want to get bogged down on the compliance side, because we're building this really fast growth business that's omni-channel in the US and D2C internationally and expanding really quickly. And we want to like continue to do what we're good at and leave the bits like what Alex was just talking about, like to somebody else, because it's very complicated. And even, so we're leaving that side. We're trusting Passport completely. So I'd highly recommend everyone, whether it's Passport or somebody else, like don't try to figure it out yourselves, because there's a lot of liability on the line if you're not registered in these different countries and paying the appropriate taxes. You could be hit with a huge bill or some other fine, I'm sure. And even some things like an interesting learning Alex was sharing about it was, we always had thought in the cosmetic industry that like a lot of these countries we couldn't sell in because we didn't have French language on our packaging, or we weren't registered yet in some of them. And so we were holding off on a lot of them. And then when we started working with Passport, they helped us on the regulation side, which we weren't even really expecting, and kind of taught us a lot that we didn't know, which we were really pleasantly surprised about, that we were able to sell in a lot more countries than we thought we could. So I would say, yeah, that was a huge learning for us, and for everyone to just be open to, we were closed-minded to some countries because we just thought we thought we knew that we couldn't do it. And it was a big learning that we were able to. So, yeah, that was big for us.
Yeah, and on that too, I mean, clearly, Alex, everything about international shipping, like this is what you do. And it's really crazy to think about knowing this much about how much it's changing if you weren't to have a partner that was looking out for you. It's kind of like my team can't monitor what's happening with TikTok and what's happening with tariffs and what's happening in our ad accounts and what's happening in Slack. And you just can't be an authority on everything. And I feel like that's the biggest mistake, is just thinking, oh, I can just set up the shipping rules and calculate the duties and look it up on ChatGPT once, and then that's enough. But you really have to have a partner that's proactively teaching you about what's changing and warning you about what's to come. Even that like 25% line item you're saying, you don't know about that. Then when you close your books this quarter, like you're just going to get trucked. And it's just something that like a Passport rep would just write you and ask you to do and show you how to do it and like talk to your developers or do whatever has to happen. But on like a personal level of like mistakes or things that like happen around compliance that I've learned, we used to, with the beauty brand that I worked at before, Sharma Brands, we used to sell like upon launch. It was a celebrity brand with fans all over the world. We sold into every country basically that we ever thought there could be demand in. And we quickly did that and did it with Passport, and it was amazing. And we were able to be compliant everywhere. We also learned the hard way that shipping beauty into every country where there can be demand in doesn't mean it always goes perfectly. Like, for example, Turkey, it took us sometimes weeks to get our packages into customer hands. And sometimes because it was beauty and it was restricted, it just became a really bad experience, and it would be stopped at customs. And we were then basically, with Passport's help, able to understand the turn off Turkey, and just sometimes also like knowing when to back out of a country, and knowing it's better for the customer and also better for you, because you're not dealing with like a really angry fan who's using Twitter, who has waited 3 weeks, who's been assured it's all going to be perfect. Sometimes you just like know when to cut off. And I feel like that's been really helpful, is to have a partner that doesn't just want you to sell into every country, but who will like help you exit gracefully and easily. And I think too, just in general, there's pressure on international as a customer. If you're not getting your package from something local, like that like 8-figure, run stage, if you've waited weeks and a long time for your package and it doesn't go perfectly, customers are really pissed in that moment. And my favorite part about Passport as a former customer service agent is that there's local agents that are your customer service as you, and speaking in the language of your customer, speaking to all the shipping partners in each country on behalf of your brand. And I would just die if my agents had to do that, or if I had to do that ever again. And I think I could go on forever, but when I think of Passport, I think of like all the times they've saved me versus like also all the amazing things that we've done together. And with all of this tariff stuff, which I don't claim to understand, I know my brands aren't going to get in trouble, which means I don't get in trouble, which is like all I want.
Yeah, fully agree. Now, moving on to the profitability side, Stark, I'm curious because Og's seen explosive international growth in over 60 countries. So for you guys, what's been the biggest driver of that success?
Yeah. Well, I was just keep thinking as I'm listening to Ari and Alex and Nik talk. It sounds a bit like I'm just spitting propaganda here, but I'm even more thankful that we're working with Pat.
I know. He was making me so nervous.
I know, like the customer service in all these countries and making sure they get their pack. It's hard enough, like in the U.S. dealing with the post, like to make sure people get their packages here and dealing with the local carriers, but doing it in all these international countries and that we're not having to do it. I just like, and we're shipping thousands of packages a month internationally. It just made me really thankful that we're working with you guys. So I think biggest thing of success was, we started working with Passport originally to help us with just the logistics and tax compliance. And then they had an offering for us for a while that was Passport Global, which is more of like a full white glove experience where they help you with site optimizations and taking it to the next level. And we saw like some pretty good success, just like the really crawl stage with the shipping and compliance things that they were helping us with. And then once we signed on with Passport Global, we were starting to do like $100,000 or a couple $100,000 revenue months internationally. And then it was shocking once we switched to the full Passport Global and made some site optimizations for the different countries, like including that in the pricing for UK or Europe, and including free shipping thresholds like we do in the US, and doing things like Ari had mentioned earlier, like that an international customer would want to see, like put yourself in the shoes of someone in the UK. They don't want to see your prices for everything, and then you hit them with this massive VAT bill and shipping, like this massive shipping expense. And making these site optimizations and increasing our prices in these countries so we can afford to pay for the VAT, like it's a total price rather than splitting it out for them. So the amount of money we're getting is still the same, basically, made a massive difference. Like instantly we went to like from doing, lower 6-figure months to 7-figure months, like overnight, like literally, like as soon as we turned on the optimizations, we did our first 7-figure month internationally. And I don't know why we were naive to it, because we know, conversion rate optimization is very important in the US, but it was like shocking what a difference it made internationally when we did that. And I'm just so encouraged because we're still not like perfect internationally. Like there's still more optimization we can do on our site. And like basically we're just, like Ari mentioned, like you should do specific ads and different things. Like we're doing very little specific outside of making our site more optimized, but like the ads, like we have so much room to go to optimize to like for each different country or the priority countries for us. It's just exciting because like, I don't know, we've seen the possibility, we've seen, like scaling how we've done with paid ads in the US, like that same playbook work internationally and for a better return than we were able to do in the US. And it just is very comforting to have a major sales channel that's profitable outside the US. Like just that risk diversification, it's just opened up a whole new world to us and really encouraged us to put a lot more effort into it at this point.
Yeah, I agree with all those things. And I think also, Alex Yancher, as a former finance guy, I'm curious what you think for brands that are worried about margins. How do you ensure international expansion is actually profitable?
Yeah, let me break it down into a few categories. So one is pricing strategies. That's where I think your contribution margin either is rock solid and you know what you're doing, or like I was giving that PSA about just being aware of this extra 25% if you have a US made good and you're shipping into Canada. Most brands, they don't have a 25% contribution margin or EBIT margin or whatever. So 25% is going to eat into that whole amount and put you into the red. So these duties and taxes around the world, they could get pretty high. And it's important to just be aware of what your strategy is. The most optimal strategy, I'm saying this as the CEO of a company that works with, close to 1,000 brands and has seen it all over the last decade of doing this. Whenever the rule of thumb is, whenever the localized experience is to do X, then you should do X as the US brand. So for example, in the UK, they don't break VAT out as a separate line item like we do sales tax in the US. So all things being equal, the rule of thumb is you should also bake that into the price of the good and show the price VAT inclusive, because that's how people in the UK are used to seeing prices. People in the UK are used to seeing the little British pound symbol. They're not used to seeing a dollar sign. So it's distracting for them. It's confusing for them when they see a dollar sign. I'm saying obvious things here, but these are really the conversion rate needle movers that Alex Stark was mentioning, that putting aside even the increased ad spend that they had and all of that, is just the traffic that they already got was just so much more valuable for them because they were able to convert so many more visitors. And the more localized that experience is, duty, same thing. Like, we never really see, even in the US, I've never seen a line item when I'm buying something that says duties. And if I did, I would stop, I would think about it, I would do the numerator denominator to see what percentage it is. And anytime, as we all know, this is true for B2B and even more true in D2C, but anytime your customer is thinking, they're not buying and they're not converting. So you want to remove any brain damage from your cart. And that's what a lot of these localization strategies are about. It's just about making it look as if you're based in the UK and you know exactly what that market looks like, with all the right pricing and symbols and all of that. And in turn, that's also going to make you do it profitably, because you're not ignoring these, you're maximizing your conversion rate. And at the same time, you're not ignoring these potentially big costs, like that is 20% in UK. And you're reflecting it in your prices. Then another category is around cost saving strategies. So shipping is a really big part of the cost structure for international. It's a really big part of your domestic business as well, but it's an even bigger part for international because everything is further away. And the further you have to travel, like Uber, you traveling around the block, that's $5. You traveling to the airport, that's $30. So it's the further you go, and it's true for international parcel shipping as well. So the further you go, the more expensive it is. And cross-border, by definition, is it's outside of the US, so it's further. So it's important to know where your customers conversion lines are. Meaning, do you really need to have an express solution that you're charging $25 for, or that you yourself are being charged $25 and you're eating that cost? Is that really necessary for your product? Or is a 5 business day, 6 business day, even 7 business day transit time, is that okay for the type of product that you're selling? And if that's the case, you can save like literally $15 on your shipping by having a priority service level in your cart. What we usually recommend to customers is they have a priority service level that's like 5 to 9 business day transit time, and they offer it for free or for some highly discounted amount, like $5. And then they have Express as an option, and they offer that for $25 in case this is like a gift. You don't want to lose those kind of customers. So just being thoughtful about your cost structure, and then ultimately, bringing it back to what I talked about earlier about the running portion of this is, if you have the volume, in the ability to do in-country fulfillment, really that's the best, because then it's a local delivery and your shipping costs go way down. And then lastly, this point has already been made, but I think it's a good one, is diversification. Diversification in regards to your downstream markets. We're so US centric. Like I'm guessing most brands here, although I did see somebody in New Zealand, but I bet most people here are based in either US or Canada. We're so US centric. We look at our numbers and it's like US is 80% of our sales, 90% of our sales. But for people in, let's say, like Singapore, we've been talking to a lot of brands based in Asia, and you look at their sale volume, US is like 32%, and rest of world is 70% plus of their market. So if some dislocation happens in the US, call it duties, tariffs, recession, some kind of shipping thing, whatever it is, at the very least, that's only going to impact, a certain percentage of their business rather than like 90%. We're all kind of like putting all of our eggs in the US basket here. And that's not really where the world is going. In spite of all the, rhetoric around the world, we're still really globalizing from a culture and top of funnel standpoint. So I think it's really important to diversify. And we're 350 million people in the US, English speaking. There's like another billion out there that's US speaking and has a very similar, wealth profile as the US. So tons of customers out there.
Could I ask
Amazing.
one extra thing I just thought of? Sorry, Alex.
Yeah, please.
Of course.
Just as you were talking, like about that VAT example again, it just reminded me of a stat for us that our revenue in the UK increased 16 times since we made the site changes that included VAT into the price. So it's not a separate line item. So like really, really massive difference some of these things can make. And as you were talking, the other thing I remembered how it played out was Passport gave us a list. They recommended all the countries one by one of which ones we could ship to compliance and regulatory wise, and which they recommended not to, and the reasons, because too expensive for duty or shipping or compliance wasn't allowed. And then we chose the 60-ish countries we went to. And I think something that also really helped us scale was doing a broad amount of countries. Originally we're like, we're only going to do these few, but like same like Meta. I don't know if there are many advertisers on here, but going as broad as possible with targeting on Meta and a lot of the paid social platforms is like what wins these days. And I think giving it a broad reach on these paid social platforms, like just targeting, even if some of those countries aren't going to be huge selling places, it gives Meta a lot more liquidity in the auction to let it target 60 plus countries. So I'd highly recommend to go as broad as possible if you have a partner that can handle the logistics and all that complicated stuff. That's really worked well for us advertising. Even if 5 of the countries or 10 of the countries are making the majority of revenue, our campaigns have performed much better by going super broad with the country targeting.
Amazing. We had a couple other questions, but I want to move over to Q&A just to make sure we can get through. There's about 5 questions here. So starting with first question, first of 2 from Ronak. The first one says, how can we ensure our HS codes and product classifications are optimized for both cost savings and compliance?
I could take that. Yeah, we do, as part of our onboarding at Passport, we do a full review, and wherever within the realm of what's legal and possible, we try to push the boundary as much as possible in assign an HS code that is going to be accepted by a customs broker, and will give you the lowest possible duty rate wherever possible. Whenever something is on the margin and it's controversial, we don't put you at risk by telling you, good news, you're going to get a lower HS code, and then you find out the hard way that actually it's not accepted and you have to pay back all this money in arrears. We get an opinion from our customs broker. That's actually one of the advantages of working with Passport, is that we are our own logistics provider. every other internationalization solution provider, they outsource the logistics to a third party, and the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And this is one of our major strengths. It's been incredibly challenging to build a company that's like in logistics and software at the same time. But we've been doing it for 8 years, building it brick by brick, so that now, I would say we're the market leader in this space, partially because of this dynamic of us having our own warehouses, having our own custom broker relationships, and we could get to the bottom of what the best HS code, what the best classification is, without putting anybody at risk.
And on that,
And-
my friend Kat, who I grew up with, she works at Passport. And I remember before I started working with Passport, this was in 2020, and I didn't even know she worked there. I would see on Instagram pictures of her just like shipping boxes. Like she truly was like in the warehouse. And then a year later, we realized that she worked there. We realized I work with them. And then she's on like really intense software calls and helping onboarding. We're like, didn't you just ship a box last week? So it's just crazy. But she's really smart. So of course you do both.
Ari, she's celebrating 7 years with us, and she was our first hire at Passport.
And we have the same birthday. So
Wow.
for like 25 years, every year, at least once a year, we talk. So yeah, I'll find
March
out.
30th, is that right?
Yeah, I'll find out in 18 days what she's up to.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
Follow up
for that.
I know Kat's birthday, March 30th. Yep.
That's really nice.
I barely remember my own birthday.
Follow up from Ronak too. Curious, how do duty and tax refunds work for e-commerce returns? Anything there to streamline this?
Yeah, absolutely. We only have 5 minutes. There's a lot of nuance. If it's below a certain amount, above a certain amount, there's a different answer for it. Different countries have different ways of handling it. Ronak, please reach out to me, alex@passportglobal.com. Happy to have a conversation with you about it. But the short answer is it is possible, and we do it.
Amazing. And Rebecca wants to know, how's Passport's localization and storefront optimization different from Shopify markets?
Yeah, so it's actually very similar. A lot of what we do on the at least for Shopify brands, is built on top of Shopify markets. So we're going in there and we're configuring it to be optimal. And I would consider Shopify markets an incredible palette on which to paint a beautiful internationalization picture with. But that's really all it is. You still need to actually set everything up, configure it the right way, do some A/B testing, know what the best practices are, and that's where we really come in.
Amazing. And maybe Stark, this one's for you, but how do you price shipping to be competitive with the local market? Thomas wants to know.
Well, I mean, I go back to that sheet that I said that Passport presented us of what they recommend for the different countries. And I think they have done research into different countries and work with a lot of brands to see what works. And I think recommending which countries to show the shipping cost to, like we do free shipping thresholds in a lot of the countries, and we dynamically change the pricing of our products in those countries based on what we're doing on the shipping front. So it's kind of a mix. It was really on Passport's recommendations of what we should charge or what we offer for free and how much we have to dynamically increase our prices so that the shipping rate the customers see in those countries is palatable. And to make sure we're not losing all of our margin by increasing our prices to make up for it.
Amazing. And last question I want to throw in comes from Paul. Paul says, we sell perishable products, vegan and non-vegan dairy cheese. We're based in Austin, Texas. What considerations do we need to think about for global shipping?
This is a tough one. Perishable products, they do have a nature of perishable products that they spoil, and transit time really, really matters. So I would say the most important challenge to solve is to get a cost-effective international shipping provider that is going to guarantee, give you time-definite delivery. Ogee, I don't think they really need time-definite delivery. Most brands don't, 99% of brands don't, but perishable, that's the one category where you really need and want time-definite delivery. You want to make sure that they can handle something perishable and, dry ice or whatever you carry with it. So I'd start your journey there, Paul.
Amazing. Alex, you want to talk about the giveaway that we're doing?
Yeah, let's talk about the giveaway. So, we're doing a $5,000 Go Global Growth Grant giveaway. A lot of G's there. Everybody who's on this webinar, they get their name entered for the raffle. You get your name entered twice if you sign up for a sales meeting with us to incentivize you if it happens before, or for a Passport demo if it happens before April 18th. So please go for it. Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. Cool.
Amazing. I call this the 5Gs giveaway, $5,000 and 5Gs in the acronym behind it.
I missed that. I missed that pun. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Amazing.
Sorry.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining. Thanks for taking this hour on your calendar and coming to spend it with us. For everybody who joined in from a recording or saw this after, throw this video up in the chat GPT, ask it any questions. Alex from Passport shared a bunch of good insights and tips. And again, if you have any questions, shoot any of us an email, sign up for a demo with Passport, double your entry into the 5Gs giveaway. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nick.
everybody.
Thanks, Alex.